His attorney's face turned pale. He was totally white, as if someone had drained all of his blood. With shaking hands, Bradley Whitmore, the most costly divorce lawyer in the state and the man who never loses, was there looking over papers he obviously did not anticipate seeing. His self-assured grin vanished like ice cream on a scorching pavement as my husband, Vincent, sat beside him. It was replaced by pure terror. The man who ordered me to leave his home. The man who called our daughter derogatory names. The man who believed he was going to rob me of everything. At last, he comprehended. He was already defeated. However, allow me to explain how I arrived. Because I was the one who believed my life was over 7 weeks ago. Miranda Lowry is my name. My age is 34. And I thought my marriage was good for 10 years. Good, but not flawless. Before I became a mother, I worked as a forensic accountant. Actually, it's quite good. I made a living by discovering hidden cash. I exposed fraud methods that CEOs believed to be infallible. However, Vincent persuaded me to stay at home after my 2-year-old daughter Hazel was diagnosed with a persistent respiratory illness. She needed me, he declared. He made enough money for both of us, he stated. I could always go back to work later, he replied. It's funny how occasionally it works out. So I gave up my career to raise our child and support his dreams. It began like any other Tuesday night. I was preparing dinner. At the kitchen table, Hazel was working on her schoolwork. Vincent also returned home early. That ought to have been my first red flag. Vincent never returned home early. He undid his necktie, took a seat across from our daughter at the table, and quietly declared that he had filed for divorce. Suddenly, as if he were telling me that he picked up dry cleaning. However, he continued speaking, and each phrase struck me like a blow to the gut. He desired everything: the investment accounts, the cars, and the house. Bradley Whitmore had already been employed by him. Therefore, I should just concede that I would lose. Then he turned to face our 8-year-old daughter Hazel, who was sitting there listening to everything. And he said something I will always remember. He claimed that neither my sick, foul-smelling daughter nor I were necessary. In fact, he referred to her as stinky. Sick, as if she were trash to be discarded. Hazel started crying. As my whole world fell apart around us, I held her. Vincent simply sat there, appearing irritated as though our suffering interfered with his plans. The doorbell rang. It did, of course, because there is always someone waiting to make things worse when your life breaks down. Dolores, Vincent's mother, entered without waiting for a response. Of course, she had a key. Dolores had boundary problems, just as the ocean has water problems. She entered my kitchen as if she owned it, which I assume she now feels she does, and she began measuring the windows right away. My daughter was crying in my arms as she checked the measurements for new drapes using a small tape measure she had in her fancy purse. I was never liked by Dolores. She made it apparent that I wasn't suitable for her beloved kid from the moment Vincent introduced us. I was raised in a typical middle-class household. I attended a state university. I didn't seem to have the proper window treatments, connections, or lineage. She made small remarks about my cooking, housework, parenting, and everything else for 10 years. She was victorious now. She expressed Hazel was already buckled up in the back seat, holding onto her plush rabbit and appearing perplexed as to why we were leaving our house. Vincent did not give her a farewell embrace. He avoided even glancing at her. He simply looked at his watch as if we were causing him to be late for something more crucial. I didn't know about his girlfriend yet, but it was probably a golf match. I drove away from the man I believed I knew, the life I had created, and the house I had paid for. When will we be returning home? My daughter asked. I had the bank statement, but I had no response. Additionally, Vincent seems to have forgotten about my 10 years of professional training. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every single comment, and I am incredibly grateful to each and every one of you. I am so grateful for your support. Vincent wasn't content to simply dissolve our union. His goal was to totally ruin me. Our mutual acquaintance stopped answering my calls after a few days. At last, one of them explained why. Everyone had been informed by Vincent that I was psychologically disturbed. He said that I struggled with substance misuse. He made a suggestion that I might not be a good mother. After 10 years of being a loving mother and wife, all of a sudden I was the antagonist in my own tale. Later on, I learnt that he had spent months crafting this story. Small remarks at dinner gatherings, worried murmurs to neighbors. Before I even realized there was an issue, he was setting the stage for his ideal divorce. With such inventive storytelling abilities, the man ought to have been a novelist rather than a real estate developer. However, 3 weeks before Vincent even filed for divorce, the worst part arrived in the mail. Our health insurance provider informed me that Hazel was no longer covered with an explanation of benefits. She was no longer covered by his policy. Suddenly, my daughter, who needed daily medicine and regular treatments for her respiratory illness, had no insurance. Our small rental flat received the first drugstore bill. I felt physically ill as I gazed at the number. For one medication, that was more than our monthly rent. Money was no longer the only factor in this. This had to do with the health of my daughter. Vincent didn't even have the courtesy to worry whether our child was harmed in the crossfire while he was using her as a weapon. At that point, I believe something changed within me. Fear began to change, becoming more intense. That week, I met with a divorce lawyer, a pleasant woman with sympathetic eyes and a messy office. Her expression darkened as she glanced at my file and saw the name of Vincent's attorney, Whitmore Bradley. She let out a loud sigh. Fighting Bradley Whitmore was like trying to stop a tsunami with an umbrella, she said, so I should probably just accept whatever settlement he gave. Fantastic. Very inspiring. Whitmore informed me the hourly rate when I asked. I estimated that it would probably cost $500 to just sneeze in front of the dude. I had to visit Vincent's office a few days later. Both parties are legally entitled to request financial records during the divorce process. I required copies of business statements and tax returns. Ruth, a reserved woman who worked as Vincent's secretary, assisted me in gathering the information I was entitled to. I hardly noticed her that day because of what I saw through Vincent's office door, despite the fact that she had gentle eyes and a nervous tendency of glancing over her shoulder. Tiffany Vance was there. My husband's desk was covered in designer clothing like a human ornament, and he was 26 years old with blonde highlights. She touched Vincent's arm in the manner that women touch guys they are having sex with while laughing at something he said, and she grinned, proud rather than ashamed or contrite, when she noticed me standing in the doorway. She gave me the impression that I was already yesterday's news. She was the brand new tomorrow. The 2-year affair had been ongoing. Lies for 2. I was going to find out why now. It had been 6 years since I had applied my forensic accounting expertise. However, it appears that this type of training does not go away. Like a computer in sleep mode, it simply waits to awaken when you need it. Every night after Hazel went to bed, I began arranging papers on my kitchen table. Everything I could lawfully collect through divorce discovery, including bank statements, tax returns, and credit card bills. In addition, since accountants are inherently document hoarders, I have maintained documents over the years. Although people frequently use numbers to lie, my grandma used to declare that numbers don't lie. My specialty was spotting falsehoods, and Vincent had been lying for a very long time. I gave Patricia Holbrook, my former college flatmate, a call. Together, Patricia and I had studied forensic accounting, stayed up late before tests, and fantasized of apprehending corporate criminals. She had continued to work in the profession and established a prosperous practice. She didn't hesitate when I told her about my predicament. She claimed that examining my husband's dubious financial situation seemed like the ideal Friday night, and she was all for it. Patricia arrived with a legal pad, wine, and takeaway Chinese food. We laid everything out like a financial crime scene on the floor of my living room. In less than 2 hours, she was pointing at numbers and grimacing like she did when she discovered something tasty in college. She informed me that my husband either concealed a large sum of money or was a horrible mathematician. I informed her that Vincent was truly quite good at maths. Then we were going to have some fun, she remarked with a smile as Vincent intensified his assaults. His attorney submitted a request for complete custody of Hazel. I wanted to shout at the logic. Vincent said I couldn't adequately care for a child with medical requirements because of my precarious financial situation. The man who called his own daughter sick and foul-smelling and took her off health insurance now sought full custody. He had no desire to become a father. Although he had never truly been one, he was aware that threatening to kidnap my daughter would cause me more pain than anything else. He used Hazel as a chess piece to coerce me from giving up. I wasn't giving up, though. No more. After 3 nights of excavation, the first finding was made. Accounts that are hidden. A different bank than our usual one was where Vincent had created investment accounts. Accounts that our shared financial statements never revealed. There was more than $200,000 in those accounts. He had been embezzling money from his company's earnings for years, saying it was for taxes and expenditures, funds that ought to have belonged to the couple, money that would have covered Hazel's medical expenses without my having to worry about how I would pay for her prescription drugs at night. The big revelation, however, was the house. The home that Vincent insisted on referring to as his own during the divorce. I recall the time we purchased it. I was experiencing difficulties when I was 7 months pregnant with Hazel. I was placed on bed rest by the doctor. Vincent promised to take care of all the closing documents. I fully trusted my spouse, so I signed the documents he brought me. How adorable and innocent the first was in those days. In our first year of marriage, my grandmother passed away. She gave me $200,000. I wanted to use it to create something worthwhile because it was the most money I had ever had. We used my money and my inheritance to put down $175,000 for our home. The bank transfer records are with me. That sum is listed as the down payment on my closing statement. However, my name was missing when I eventually took a close look at the deed. The title merely contained Vincent's name. After using my grandmother's money to purchase a property, he ensured that I was not the rightful owner. At bar association gatherings, he continued to act as though he couldn't recall her name, which delighted her greatly. Her regular prices were above my means. From the beginning, I was truthful about that. However, Camille's eyebrows raised with each page as she perused the proof Patricia and I had gathered. She grinned and sat back in her chair when she was done. We were certain to win, she added, so she would take my case on a partial contingency, a small retainer now, and a portion of the proceeds. During an earthquake, she compared Vincent's situation to a house of cards built on quicksand. I liked her right away. The retainer was paid for by Patricia's loan. Initial filing fees and document preparation were paid for with $8,000 from my grandmother's hidden cash. Even though my grandma had passed away 9 years ago, she continued to save me I believe the poetry in that would have been appreciated by her. I was taken aback by Camille's initial command. She instructed me to seem to be defeated, give Vincent the impression that he was already victorious, make his lawyers feel at ease in their conceit, cry when the time is right, and appear perplexed by the legal process. They would become sloppier the more self-assured they grew. Additionally, carelessness leaves a trail. I therefore pretended to be an overburdened housewife who was ignorant of complex legal issues. I politely asked for additional time in response to aggressive letters from Vincent's attorney. I let my voice tremble as Vincent himself called out to boast about his certain victory. In order to avoid the humiliation of losing in court, he advised me to simply accept his kind offer. I mentioned that I was considering it. That was the smartest thing I had done in years, he replied with a laugh. In the meantime, I was constructing a case that would put an end to his career. Every night, Patricia and I worked. Every secret account was recorded by us. Every questionable transfer was tracked down. Every dollar that ought to have been marital property, but nevertheless found its way into Vincent's hidden portfolios, was tallied. The sum was no longer $200,000. It was more than $600,000 when we were done counting. $600,000 that was concealed from his own business associates, the IRS, and our marriage. My spouse wasn't merely unfaithful. He was a criminal. The Tiffany evidence was almost amusing. Nearly. I spent more money on Hazel's medical care over the course of 3 years than Vincent had spent on the lovely car he had purchased for her. He purchased jewelry for her, including a $4,000 necklace that I recalled seeing on the credit card statement and inquiring about. It was a client gift, he informed me, in order to give them a private, romantic retreat just 15 minutes from our family's house. He also rented her an apartment. His business expense records contained the receipts for all of this, which he had claimed as tax deductions. He wasn't merely unfaithful to his wife. Then, he was also defrauding the IRS. That kind of thing usually makes them frown. Ruth then stepped forward. That day at Vincent's office, Ruth, the quiet secretary with the gentle eyes, assisted me in gathering paperwork. One evening, she called me in a barely audible whisper and asked if we could get together somewhere private. She told me everything while we sat in a coffee shop across town, where no one would recognize us. Ruth had been employed by Vincent for 9 years, nearly as long as his business had been in existence. She had seen him grow his company, win over investors, and gradually change into someone she didn't know. The fraudulent invoices were visible to her. The suspicious wire transfers had been handled by her. In Delaware, she had submitted the paperwork for the shell company. She told herself it was none of her business for years. The job was necessary for her. She was a single woman without a safety net who was getting close to retirement. However, Ruth's daughter had a horrible divorce 5 years ago. The wealthy and well-connected husband of her daughter stole everything. Her daughter nearly went insane, lost her house, and was denied custody of her children for 6 months. Ruth saw her own child suffer as a strong man exploited the legal system. Does that sound familiar? The hearing was scheduled for 7 weeks after Vincent filed for divorce, expedited because of the child custody issues and Camille's emergency motion regarding fraud in Vincent's financial declarations. The judge assigned to our case was Ella Lehner Fitzgerald, known for having zero tolerance for lying in her courtroom. Things were coming together. Vincent called me 2 days before the hearing. He sounded relaxed, happy even. He said he was looking forward to finally putting this behind us. He mentioned that he and Tiffany were planning a trip to celebrate after his victory. The Malda, very romantic, very expensive. He suggested I use my settlement money wisely, since it would be the last help I ever got from him. I said I appreciated the advice. I wished him safe travels and I hung up the phone and laughed until I cried. He had no idea. No idea at all. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old paper, and anxiety. I had dressed carefully that morning, professional but not flashy, the kind of outfit that says, I am a responsible mother, not a gold digger. Camille had coached me on this. Appearances matter, especially in family court. Vincent arrived with Bradley Whitmore like they were walking into a victory party. Expensive suits, confident smiles, the easy body language of men who had never lost anything important. Whitmore carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Vincent winked at me across the courtroom. Actually winked like this was all a fun game. He had already won. Dolores sat in the front row of the gallery wearing a dress that screamed, "Look how wealthy and superior I am." She had a small notebook, probably planning to write down every humiliating detail of my defeat to share with her friends later. Tiffany was there too, a few rows back, checking her phone and looking bored. I wondered if she had started packing for the Malda yet. 3 men I knew from business gatherings, Vincent's business associates, were seated in the rear of the gallery. 2 days prior, they had received their evidence packages. Vincent had not been informed of their arrival. In a way, it was more terrifying than outright rage, because their faces were completely unreadable. I would like to thank you for listening to my story. If you are still with me, please take a moment to hit the like button and consider sharing this with someone you think should hear it if it touches your heart. I am incredibly appreciative of each and every one of you, and your support keeps me going. Let me now tell you what transpired. Everyone stood up when Judge Fitzgerald entered. Her reading glasses were perched on her nose, and her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She appeared to be a librarian who had lost all patience after witnessing too much absurdity in her life. I liked her right away. Whitmore began by outlining Vincent's case. He depicted a prosperous businessman weighed down by an unstable spouse who had made no contributions to their union. He discussed the generous settlement offer made by Vincent. He was worried about poor Hazel, who obviously needed a secure home environment that only her father could give her. He used terms like unpredictable, financially irresponsible, and pattern of concerning behavior. Even though it was entirely made up, the performance was excellent. Camille's turn came next. She began modestly. Basic inquiries concerning our finances, house, and marriage. Vincent gave a confident response. Indeed, they bought the house while they were married. Indeed, it was solely titled in his name. No, his spouse had not helped with the purchase. At the time, she had no job. Camille gave a contemplative nod. She then presented Exhibit A. The bank records indicate that 8 years ago, a $175,000 wire transfer was made from my personal account to the closing company. The sum that precisely corresponds to the home's down payment. The date that precisely corresponds to the closing date. The memo line that reads, in my own handwriting, house down payment. Vincent's grin wavered. She was curious to see where this would go. The car Vincent purchased for Tiffany, the flat he rented for their meetings, and the jewelry, including that $4,000 necklace, were all presented by Camille as proof of Vincent's extramarital affair, and were all written off as business expenses. She pointed out that this seemed to be both marital and tax fraud. I looked at Tiffany. She had stopped staring at her phone. She was staring at the door. At last, the survival instinct takes over. I assume she quietly left the courtroom after realizing that the trip to the Maldives would not take place and that her relationship with Vincent Carrington would soon become extremely awkward. Dolores's mouth hung slightly open as she sat motionless in her chair. In her lap, the notebook was left unattended. She had not intended to share this tale with her friends. Vincent made an attempt to talk. He claimed that I had fabricated evidence in order to discredit him and that all of this was false. Judge Fitzgerald interrupted him. Throughout her career, she had seen numerous cases. She claimed that she was constantly misled. However, it was truly astounding how daring it was to lie so much and so blatantly while simultaneously defrauding a spouse, business associates, and the federal government, and not in a positive way. She gazed at Vincent in the same way that you gaze at something disagreeable adhered to your shoe. She then turned to face me, and for a split second, I saw respect in her eyes. The decision made by Judge Fitzgerald fulfilled all of my expectations and more. I have full custody of Hazel. I received full ownership of the house that I had paid for with my grandmother's inheritance. Due to Vincent's fraud, concealed accounts, and courtroom perjury, I was granted 70% of all marital assets. Full child support was determined using his real income rather than the fictitious figures he had submitted. Hazel's medical costs were fully covered, and Vincent was mandated to promptly reinstate her health insurance, going back to the day he had taken her away. The man who claimed to want everything was on the verge of losing everything. It was now legally necessary for the man who had told me to leave his house to leave my house, whether he liked it or not. The man who described his daughter as sick and odorous would have to pay for her care for the next 10 years. However, the court decision was only the start of Vincent's downfall. Within 3 weeks, the federal investigation got underway. The IRS does not take tax fraud lightly, particularly when it is so well documented. While an investigation was underway, his assets were frozen. There was a flag on his passport. The Malda would have to wait, possibly indefinitely. His business associates brought their own legal action. A serious issue is embezzlement from a partnership. Gregory and the others were also not feeling forgiving. They demanded damages in addition to their money back, because Whitmore had inexplicably developed a scheduling conflict that prevented him from continuing representation. Vincent's attorneys, plural now, were billing hours they would most likely never collect. Dolores gave up using social media. The court documents were public records, and her friends had seen them. When everyone could read about her son's $600,000 in hidden accounts and his ongoing federal investigation, the gold digger story fell apart. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that she had removed all of her posts regarding the divorce and was telling people that she had always been worried about Vincent's character. Certain things are always the same. About 45 minutes after the court decision, Tiffany vanished from Vincent's life. Rent was no longer being paid because the flat he had rented for her was in his name and his assets were frozen. 2 weeks later, the vehicle was repossessed. I have no idea where she went, and I discovered that I didn't really give a damn. She wasn't the illness. She was a symptom. Many of Vincent's issues were unrelated to her. Ruth went into retirement on time. She sent me a card with a pressed flower from her garden